الخير. أرحب بكل من انضم لنا اليوم عبر الزوم في هذه الجلسة الاستثنائية. لست وحدك مع دكتور كيت بورترفيلد. آم، أذكركم أن بإمكانكم متابعتنا عبر صفحتنا على الفيسبوك وأكيد قناتنا على يوتيوب أيضا، وستظهر الروابط هنا على الشات. سأكون معكم أنا فرح جلاد من أريج خلال الساعة ونصف القادمة، وأيضا مع ضيفتنا كما ذكرت لكم دكتور كيت بورترفيلد. الصحفيون والصحفيات ومدققو المعلومات يتابعون دون توقف ولأشهر. يعني إذا فكرنا فيها، بعد يومين تحديدا سيكون قد مضى 4 أشهر على ما يحدث في غزة، على الإبادة الجماعية في غزة. ومنذ هذه الأشهر نتابع بشكل متواصل صور، مقاطع، فيديوهات، إثباتات، أخبار يومية متلاحقة من قطاع غزة المحاصر وفلسطين المحتلة ولبنان. لسنا وحدنا كذلك، بل أيضا الملايين من المشاهدين حول العالم العربي وحول العالم. يعني من منا لا يشعر بالقلق أو الأرق أو حتى الذنب أو العجز أو كلها مجتمعة أحيانا يعني. وأكيد نسأل أنفسنا كيف يمكن أن لا يتحول توثيق ومتابعة الحقيقة إلى آثار أو صدمات نفسية بعيدة المدى، قد تؤثر على علاقتنا بأهلنا، بعائلاتنا، تؤثر على عملنا، قيامنا بعملنا، وحتى على متابعتنا لحياتنا اليومية. وأيضا يعني دائما نقول أننا حتى نشعر بالذنب أننا نمارس حياتنا اليومية أحيانا وأنها مستمرة. وكيف يمكن أن نتعامل مع المستويات العالية المتراكمة من القلق، الحزن، العجز، الذنب، الشعور بالخذلان، الكوابيس، كل هذه المشاعر السلبية يعني. وكيف نحمي صحة أطفالنا النفسية وهم أيضا يتابعون كل هذه الأخبار، وكيف نشرح لهم ما يحدث. كيف نتعامل مع هذا الشعور بأننا يعني نحن كصحفيين نشعر بأن ما نقدمه لا قيمة له جانب إلى جانب ما، أو التضحيات التي يقدمها الناس على الأرض، أو التضحيات التي يبذلها الصحفيون، فهم يبذلون أرواحهم لنقل الحقيقة. كيف لا تتحول هذه الأعراض النفسية إلى أعراض جسدية أو أعراض دائمة ويعني مستمرة. يعني لنتحدث أكثر عن هذا ولنفهم أكثر، نتحدث اليوم مع دكتور كيت بوترفيلد، وهي أخصائية نفسية كلينيكية واستشارية في برنامج مستشفى بيلفيو لضحايا التعذيب في مدينة نيويورك. ولأكثر من 20 عاما قدمت الدكتورة بوترفيلد العلاج للكبار وللصغار الذين تعرضوا للحروب والصدمات الناجمة عن اللجوء والتعذيب. وهي أيضا تقوم بتقديم الاستشارات في القضايا المتعلقة بالصدمات للصحفيين ومنظمات حقوق الإنسان. وهي عضو في مركز دارت المتخصص في الصحافة والصدمات النفسية. سنقوم بوضع رابط مركز دارت على الشات، يعني بإمكانكم أيضا الدخول للمركز للاطلاع على الأدلة المختلفة، على المقالات المختلفة والأبحاث المختلفة التي قام المركز بنشرها. والدكتورة بورترفيلد أخيرا أيضا تدرس وتعمل مع المنظمات حول قضايا الصحة النفسية وإدارة الضغوط وأفضل الممارسات للتعامل مع الصدمات. أتمنى أن المقدمة لم تكن طويلة جدا يعني. وكما ذكرت لكم بإمكانكم وضع أسئلتكم عبر الكيو اند اي وعبر الشات. أرحب بكل الموجودين، يعني دكتور نادين، دكتور أشرف، يعني أنا أرى أسماءكم على الشات. وأذكركم بإمكانكم طرح أسئلتكم جميعها لتجيب عنها دكتور كيت بوترفيلد. وأنا قبل ذلك أخذت جلسة مع دكتور كيت وكانت جلسة ممتعة جدا جدا، فأتمنى أن تستفيدوا منها كثيرا. تفضلي دكتور كيت.
Thank you, Farah. That is such a nice introduction, and I'm so truly honored to be here today with Arij. And even just seeing in English some of the places where you all are calling in from Jordan, from Syria, from Abu Dhabi, from Mauritania. I am greatly honored to have the chance to be with journalists and news professionals from all around the world during very, very difficult times. So thank you, first of all, really special to Arij, to Muna, to Saeed for helping, to Farah, to our wonderful interpreters, Haifa and Mary. We are doing this as a team. So let me begin. My name again is Dr. Kate Porterfield, and I am a clinical psychologist. I am in New York City. So it's 11 a.m. for me. I know it is afternoon for many of you. I hope you are having a good, safe day. I love seeing the chat, by the way, so please feel free. I might not catch everything, but you're welcome to put things in the chat. I do not read or speak Arabic, much to my sadness, but I can read anything in English. So I work with the DART Center at Columbia University in New York City. The DART Center has been a resource and a place for journalists and news media professionals to share, to learn, to collaborate around telling stories that have to do with trauma. And we are very lucky to be able to hear from so many journalists like you about how do we cover these terrible stories? How do we report on people being hurt, people being degraded, people being harmed by others, and keep their dignity, keep our respect for them in place? How do we do that? But also, how do we take care of ourselves? And I will tell you, I have been working for 25 years with traumatized people across the world. And I've learned so much. I feel very lucky. But I've learned that if you don't understand the imprint of trauma yourself, if you don't understand what does trauma do to people, then you're not going to do as well with other people who you might be reporting, photographing, recording. And also you might yourself really struggle with the impact of trauma. So today, what I'm hoping to do is I'm going to give a bit of a lecture for the first part to just lay the groundwork for understanding, well, what is trauma and what does it do to us? And then how can we journalists, that's your field, right? How can you do your best work, but also keep yourselves psychologically safe and healthy? So that's a big introduction to say, I'm just so happy to be here. I see the chat flying by. I just can't believe where we have people from all over the world. I just am thrilled. I'm really thrilled. And I just know there is so much happening in the world that you all are living in as well as reporting. So let us begin. Farah, you see my slides, yes? So I'm going to try to speak a little slowly. I tend to talk fast, but my wonderful interpreters are here with me. We're going to be thinking today about a couple different frames. I like to use a frame when I work in trauma. And what I mean by a frame is a way to understand trauma so that you can work with it and do your best job rather than simply be reacting and kind of having feelings that might be overwhelming about trauma. So a frame really helps a psychologist, but a frame can also help journalists. And at DART Center, we really believe that news professionals who have trauma knowledge will be better served to then help those, tell stories in an ethical way, but also to help themselves. So we're going to start today with a frame called a biopsychosocial approach to trauma-facing journalism. I'm going to say it again, a biopsychosocial approach. And I'm going to explain, well, what is that? And I hope you will find it useful. And I will be listening for questions. After a few minutes, I'll open up for questions. I want to begin with some basic agreements about talking about trauma and pain and human suffering. One is that in this time right now, we are talking together. This is a learning space, but also maybe sharing. And I want to just ask that we are respectful of one another and, of course, confidential. This is, of course, being recorded. It is streaming. There is a limit to some confidences. But with that, I want us to be aware of each other's privacy and need for respect. I also want to say that on this very webinar right now, we each bring our own background, our own personal history, including possibly experiencing trauma, and for some of you, literally being in spaces right now where there is trauma happening. So we want to be aware of each other's needs, and again, trying to think about ways to take care of each other with our language and our care. I also want to just recognize right now that we are in a privileged space by being professionals who are talking about trauma. And that means we might not understand everybody's experiences that we're talking about, right? So we might be sitting in a space right now that is not affected by war, for instance, me in New York City. And so that means I necessarily might be not understanding those who are talking from a position of being in a space of war. So I want to acknowledge that. And I just want to say that to me and at DART, what we try to invite news professionals to do then is to work in good faith in spaces where you are talking about trauma, which is you try to think respectfully and with care about those you are reporting on. So I will try to use that same care, and with great respect, I'd like to begin. I'm going to begin with a little exercise, and there's a few times during this webinar I will ask you to reflect, to think. And so stick with me, try to pay attention, maybe not multitask, and try to really let yourself reflect in the places where I invite you. In my own experience of working with trauma, I work a lot in prisons. I've worked a lot with people who've been through very bad war and torture. Presence is really important, which is sitting and listening and trying to keep your mind open and aware. So our first reflection today is actually going to be what we call self-assessment. I'm inviting you right now to just take a minute and imagine you were going to give a 1 through 10 score for how stressed you are right now. And if you want to put a number in the chat, you're welcome to. You do not have to. But I'd like you to just say right now, if I say, how's my stress? A 10 means I am in severe stress, and a 1 is no, I have no stress right now. What would you give yourself? I'm going to turn the chat on for myself here. Okay, and we're already seeing a range. Yes. Look at the numbers coming by, everybody. And do you see that range? I am seeing 1s, people saying I'm okay, and I'm seeing 10s, and I see 5s, 6, 7. So what that tells us is we know in the journalism field, there is a range of what we are exposed to, right? And you might be sitting in a meeting with someone, or you might be on a Zoom with someone. And Mohammed is asking by stress. I mean, whatever you define as stress right now for yourself, how high do you give yourself a score, Mohammed? That is what I mean by, just giving yourself a broad score. If you were in a meeting with your team, if you were on a Zoom with your team, if you were about to deploy with your photographer and your audio recorder, you might not know that that person is a 7 today. And maybe you're feeling okay, you're well rested, you feel pretty good. Or maybe your teammate doesn't know that you are a 9 today because you just handled some really difficult photographs or some video material that you made that was very, very hard to look at. So my first invitation, you're going to hear me use the word invitation, is for you all to notice your own stress level so that you'll be better able to notice and respond to your team members as well. So this first little reflection is simply a way to say, how am I doing? Now, let's talk about trauma in your field. You all do an amazing thing. You are telling stories from the world, and you are trying to bring information out of very difficult places where there's bad things happening at times, right? That's trauma-facing journalism. What we believe at DART is that you need to have skills, tools that you use when you do trauma-facing work. How many of you take your editing skills seriously? How many of you take your writing skills seriously? Your photography skills, if you're a photojournalist? How many of you audio editors are very careful about sound quality? Those are the tools of your trade. However, trauma also requires tools, because when humans are in conditions of trauma, their body and their mind reacts. And if you don't have tools to manage that, you can be harmed or you can do harm. So we think about at DART our outward-facing skills, if you look on the left side of the screen, which are the skills we need when we are interviewing, going into a community that's been harmed, talking to a source on the phone who we know might have just had something bad happen. What are the skills we use when we engage, right? That's one set of tools. But just as important are our inward-facing skills and tools. What do we need as we see these conditions that are very distressing, as we face trauma ourselves in our reporting, or as we go home at night and think about the stories that we're covering? Farah very beautifully said that feelings come up as much, she used the words guilty, despair, tension, and feeling worthless. Just in your short remarks, Farah, you brought up 4 very powerful feelings. So, and I want to applaud that and say how important it is that we recognize our feelings. That is part of our inward-facing toolkit. So we're going to break that down for a few minutes now. Let's specifically spend some time learning about stress and trauma, okay? So first of all, I'm a psychologist and I really like people to understand trauma because they will do much better handling it. And the first thing I like to tell people is stress is not the same as trauma. Stress is actually normal. In a regular life, you are going to have stress. It's very hard to have a stress-free life. Why? Because stress is really the everyday environment acting on us in a way that requires us to adapt. So we might have money problems or relationship difficulties or illness, or how about a deadline on a piece that you've been working on really hard? That's stress, right? You can also have positive stress, getting a new job, moving, having a baby. However, stress does take a toll on us humans, on we human beings. Now, stress is different than trauma. Trauma is a situation or events, single or plural, that overwhelms the human organism. And that's really important to understand because trauma requires that the body has to react in order to survive. You see the word in red, bio. That means the human body. Trauma involves the body reacting. And I'm going to actually teach you this very specifically. I hope it will be helpful. I believe it's very important for journalists to understand, especially in the times we find ourselves in now, what the body does in reaction to trauma. Okay, trauma can be a life or death situation. It often is, or something that is very disturbing to the human mind and distresses the person to an extreme degree. Trauma can occur as we witness trauma. That's really important for journalists to understand. You can get a trauma reaction from seeing traumatic imagery or hearing traumatic stories, and we call that secondary traumatic stress, and we're going to talk about it. One more point before I tell you a little bit about the body is that trauma adds up. In English, we call that cumulative. It piles on, and old traumas kind of stay there, and they can get brought to life. They can be activated by new trauma. And that doesn't mean that we are only going to be living in states having to do with trauma, but it means you have to be aware of your trauma exposure so that you can notice where it is affecting you, including past traumas that may come up for you. Okay, we know that journalism has a high exposure to trauma. You all see a lot and you see it frequently, which means that you also have a high dose of trauma. Look on this screen here and you see a hazard symbol on the bottom, right? Why? Because trauma is a toxic substance. If your editor or your supervisor said, hey, I need you to go report in that building over there for the next week. And by the way, that building is full of toxic chemicals and asbestos. Please go in there Monday through Friday and report from within that building for 5 days. What would you say? Many of you might say, no, thank you. I don't think I'm going to go in that building, right? Why? Because that toxin, that chemical is going to harm me. Some of you might say, okay, wait a minute, I'll go, but let me get the right suit. Let me get protective covering. That's called hazmat. In English, we say hazmat protection. I want to invite you to think about trauma the same way, which is that being exposed to trauma and to traumatic events can harm us. So it doesn't mean you shouldn't do the work, but you have to protect yourself and find ways to care for yourself. We see on the screen here different kinds of trauma that people can get exposed to. So I'm not going to go through each of these, but I just want to clarify there is direct trauma, which is going through something yourself. And then there's secondary trauma, which is witnessing or viewing. And if we were in a big room together, I might ask you all to raise your hands if you've had any exposure to trauma in the last week. And I'm going to imagine there would be so many hands that were to be raised if I asked that. We know you all are being exposed to a lot of material that is very distressing. I also want to say that targeted trauma is trauma in which journalists experience abuse, harassment, or persecution because of their work. This is another kind of stressful, traumatic event. Also, stories that particularly affect our own personal identity can be harder. I know on this call, there are people affected by the stories that they are reporting on, meaning they are stories in your own community. That means you are even more exposed and more at risk. So I want to just say to you, journalism does have a lot of trauma, especially right now. However, please look at this slide. Journalists are resilient. You are a community that has shown, and we study this at DART, you have shown yourselves to be a group of people who, because of the work, you often do bounce back. You find ways to take meaning in what you do, and then you move on to the next story because it really matters to you. So journalists tell us, if you look at this first point on the screen, they get exposed a lot to trauma, but journalists don't always develop symptoms or what we would call emotional problems, sometimes called post-traumatic stress disorder, in English, PTSD. Journalists actually don't really have higher rates than the general public in PTSD. I just want to say a lot of this is based on American US journalists, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I just want to say we know you all are resilient because of the work you do, bringing a lot of meaning to you. That's what you tell us, at least. Now, let's try to understand a little bit about biopsychosocial functioning. I'm just looking at my chat a minute, and I'm seeing just absolutely you all are talking about stress. And yes, so I'm looking at descriptions, and we're going to go right in now to this perfect connection that you're making. Heavy heart and a tight chest, someone has written in the chat, okay? That is a description of the body. That is the human body telling you, I am in stress right now, okay? So let's break down bio, psycho, and social just for a few minutes. I hope you're all still with me. We humans are mammals. Yes,
دكتور كيف
Farah.
أنا فقط يعني سأقترح على الموجودين معنا سأقترح عليهم أن يقوموا بوضع ما يتناسب معهم من إشارات أن يضعوها عبر الشات ويقولوا لنا ماذا يشعرون. يعني البعض منهم كان يقول هناك نبضات في القلب، هناك شعور كأن الدم يتدفق. فنود أن نرى أكثر أن بينما أنت تشرحين هذه العلامات أن يضعوها هم أيضا عبر الشات.
Okay, great. Thank you, Farah. So, and are they putting in now? Are you getting some?
دكتور كيف فقط يعني سأجيب عن فقط سؤال هنا، هل هناك ترجمة؟ لأن أيضا ورد هذا السؤال عبر الQ&A. فقط أسفل الشاشة يظهر أمامكم الكرة الأرضية، بإمكانكم من خلال هذا الخيار اختيار الترجمة لكي تتمكنوا من الاستماع للمتحدثة باللغة العربية. إن كان يصعب عليكم فهم اللغة الإنجليزية بإمكانكم الاستماع للغة العربية.
Great. Thank you, Farah. So are we good? You were explaining interpretation and also inviting the journalists who would like to add things to the chat about their reactions. Is that right? Okay. So I'm going to keep going. Yes. And you just, Farah, you just wave and stop me if you need me to. Thank you all, by the way, for being with us and putting up with the need for interpretation. I'm sorry that I am not an Arabic speaker. So we are thinking now about the human response to trauma. We are bio beings, bodily beings. We are psychological beings. We have a mind, and we are social beings. Trauma affects every part of the human. Let me break that down. First of all, your body is wired for survival. Think about that for a minute. Your body is made to survive if something threatens it. And that is a beautiful part of the human organism, because if something threatens you, your body is going to do what it needs to react. However, after you have been through trauma, your body is going to sometimes still send those same messages to you. And someone said this in the chat, heart racing, tightness in the chest. That is your body still sending messages of threat and survival, threat and survival. So you have to understand the body reaction to try to calm it down. And I'm going to explain that. We are not only mammals, however. We are more than just dogs or whales or cats. We are humans, and we have a mind. And our mind has a really big part of the brain up here that makes meaning. What does that mean? It means that whatever we humans do, we are telling ourselves a story during it. It's what you journalists do for a living. You help make meaning out of the world. That meaning making is such a powerful tool for humans as they move through history. However, this is very important. After trauma and after trauma, we tend to make meaning in a way that is very negative, very much attacking ourselves, and sometimes very, very dark and hopeless, because trauma sometimes makes us humans make meaning in negative ways. So I'm going to ask you to think about that in a minute. We're biological, we are psychological, but we are also social. We humans need each other. We need each other to attach, to communicate, to take care of each other. And actually, the human brain has been shown to have problems, have symptoms if humans are not around other humans. In other words, isolation is not good for humans. Okay, and what do we know about trauma? Trauma makes humans disconnect from each other. It makes people isolate, feel that they are different, feel that maybe they are no longer themselves. So trauma makes us push each other away sometimes, and this too is a very difficult effect of trauma. So why does it matter? Because if you notice the bio, the psycho, and the social reaction that you are having to your work, you're then going to be able to do things to try to help and support yourself. So I'd like to break that down for a minute. I just want to see if in the chat there's anything I should be reading. Yeah, so people talking about not being able to focus, people having trouble with lack of patience. Somebody put lack of patience. That's a great example. Farah, do you want to read a few of the Arabic ones for me?
ارتفاع ضغط الدم، التشتت. لكن أيضا هناك غسان يقول أن البعض يعتقد أنه تكيف مع الصدمات، يعني لا يرى هذه المؤشرات ويستمر بالعمل. ولكن أيضا باعتقاد غسان هذا خطأ كبير، لأن جسده يصبح عرضة للانهيار وإدمان المشاعر السلبية. ويعني البعض يقول أن يعني الصدمة قد تجعل من الشخص شخص أقوى، وبالتالي لا يعود يشعر بهذه المؤشرات. فأنا لا أعلم ما مدى دقة هذا الكلام، أن الصدمة قد تجعل الشخص أقوى. نانسي تقول هي تمارس النيجاتيف سيلف توك، أو تشعر بضيق بالنفس أحيانا، أو تشعر بأنها مستنزفة تماما يعني. أيضا هناك علا تقول تؤثر الصدمات على أدائها واستمرارها في أو عزيمتها.
Yes.
لا، عفوا، استمرارها في العمل، ولكن لديها العزيمة في الاستمرار. لكن
Yes.
يعني أيضا يعني بالحديث عن تعليقات الموجودين معنا، يعني أريد أن أسأل، يعني هل التعرض لصدمة سابقة والتعرض لصدمة مرة أخرى من جديد لكنها تشبه التجربة السابقة تجعل من الشخص قادر على التأقلم بشكل أفضل، أم تجعل الوضع أسوأ؟
If you have previous trauma, is the question? Sorry, Farah, was that the question about if does previous trauma? Yes. And so absolutely. Let me say a couple things. So first of all, these comments are so helpful. And of course, I'm only reading in English, and I thank you to those who are writing in English. You know, I want to just point out the things you are describing are normal responses to trauma. It is so important to understand that. The human body is going to do what it needs to do. So when you say shortness of breath, low energy, pains in your body, feeling drained, not wanting to get out of bed, even though these are not good feelings, they are your body telling you that the stress is acting on the body. And it's the reason I say this is because it's really important to notice or to catch ourselves having reactions so that we do not ignore them. So I just want to say these descriptions you're giving are so important. And what I'm also hearing is that it's not all negative. Now you're talking meaning making. Someone said this is part of being a human, right? You are telling the stories of your world right now. And I think the person said, I can't find the comment right now, but oh, there's nothing wrong with this because this is how you become a human. That is meaning making. That is a way to say this work is hard. It is very painful, but it has meaning for me as a journalist. So I just want to say you're showing both sides in your comments, and that's really important. Now, I'm going to shift for a minute back to the biological response, just so I make sure I've explained something. And I do want to say to Farah's question, as I said earlier trauma kind of adds up. It's sort of like picture, a scale, right? And the scale is tipping. And you had some childhood trauma, maybe you had something happen in your early life, and now you're covering war and you're seeing people get hurt. Now the tipping is going like this, right? The scale is tipping. That is true about trauma, which is why you have to pay attention to it and take care as much as you can so that you don't get so drained or so affected that you're really not feeling well. Let me spend a few more minutes on the body. And I hope you're still with me. I thank you for all the patience you're giving me with my speaking in English here. Traumatic stress is so important to understand because your body is going to be your map. It's going to be like a map. It's going to tell you what it needs to do and what it's doing in response to stress. And most of us humans, we sort of ignore our body. We ignore what it tells us. I'm tired, so what do? I have a coffee, right? That's actually not listening to the body. Or I'm agitated or irritable, and what do? I go and I yell at somebody. I yell at that family member or my friend or my colleague. That's me not noticing that my body was trying to tell me something. So let's get very specific for a minute on this, because I want you all to become experts at noticing your body's reactions to stress. Okay, traumatic stress is not normal stress. Remember, we talked about that? It is something in which the nervous system in your body has to take charge, and it takes over. There is something called, we're going to call red arrow up. If you look on your screen, that's that red arrow in your body giving you what we call uproar or activation. And then there is another response equally as powerful, which is the gray arrow you see, which is pointing down. And we're going to call that gray arrow down. That is your body shutting you down during a trauma. Listen carefully. Both of these reactions are very, very strong and powerful sometimes during trauma. What do I mean? Let's look at this example for a minute. And this is sort of a silly example, right? It's a man, he's running here from a snake. I want you to think about this man stepping out of a cottage in the wilderness, he's in the woods, and he looks down and a huge snake is coming at him very fast. Okay, let's break down what his body is going to do to save him. And then we're going to think about, why does this matter to us? Well, we know when he sees that snake, he's going to do something very fast to do what? Survive. And what's going to happen is he's not going to think, he's going to act. He's going to do what we sometimes call fight or flight. And fight or flight is really important because it's your body doing what? Saving you. So when your body gives you fight or flight, there's a reason it thinks you need it. So for this man, he's not going to look at the snake and say, I wonder what kind of snake that is. He has brown spots. That might be poisonous, right? That's what you do in your brain. That's thinking. No, he's not going to analyze the snake. He's going to jump, run, maybe pick up a chair, try to hit it. His body is going to activate. And that's why that red arrow that you see there going up is going to activate his nervous system so that he can fight the snake. If you want to put in the chat for me, anyone who could do it, what his body's going to do. What do you need to have your body do to have yourself be able to pick up a chair or have yourself be able to run really fast? What do you need? I'm letting anyone answer in the chat, though I'm looking to see if anyone's going to throw that one in. What you need is you need your heart to beat, right? And you need your adrenaline. Thank you. You need adrenaline, which is a chemical in your body. Yes, there you go. And that adrenaline makes you run. How does it work? It's incredible. It gets your heart to beat faster. Think about that. Why do you need your heart to beat faster? Yes, it does depend on the situation, Mohammed. I'm going to talk about that. You need your heart to beat faster because you need your arms, legs to move, and they need blood to be going into them to move. You also need your breathing to change so you can get more oxygen, another incredibly important chemical. Oxygen does what? It goes into your body and makes you able to run, jump, fight. All of this is happening within seconds when he sees the snake. Why? Because his body knows he needs to survive. That is your red arrow up, fight or flight. Fight or flight is so incredibly powerful, but this is important. The problem with fight or flight is that after trauma, sometimes it comes back to us, and it comes back even when we're no longer running from the snake. And I know that you all right now, if you could just take a minute, could probably imagine, what is the snake in the current situations that you are covering, right? What are you seeing that is threatening and scary and distressing? Because chances are those things you're seeing are not just one snake, right? You're seeing multiple things happening. You're seeing many bad situations. If you're covering war, if you're covering violence, if you're covering natural disaster as well. So that snake has many, many different ways that it's affecting people, not just one situation like here in this example. Now, I want to spend a minute.
دكتورة كيت يعني
Yes.
أنا أعتذر عن المقاطعة لكن سأقرأ لك بعض الردود على الشات يعني فمثلا دكتور نادين تقول
Thank you.
أنها
Yes.
ستتجمد في مكانها بسبب الصدمة ويعني عادة هذا ما تفعله فتسألك ما الخطوات أو ما الإجراءات التي يجب عليها فعلها لتخطي ذلك. وريمون تقول أو يقول أن المواجهة هي خير سبيل. ومحمد يقول لا لحظة شوي. محمد إجابة طويلة رد الفعل اللي في الصورة تبدأ بالفكرة في إنقاذ الحياة. فإنقاذ الحياة يعني بالنسبة له إنه يعني أدرينالين وبالتالي ركض وهروب لإنقاذ هذه الحياة. أما علي عمر فيعني يقول لك سأقوم بالهجوم على الأفعى يعني الهجوم على
Good.
بس.
Wonderful. Okay, these are great. So a couple things. First of all, the comment about freeze is so important. I'm glad you brought that up. The response the human organism has to threat is rarely something that they plan, right? You don't plan your response to threat. Your body just reacts. And freezing is actually an incredibly powerful response too, because what happens in freeze, it's not only negative to freeze. Freeze is when the body pauses and takes in what is happening And usually when you freeze, your pupils in your eyes dilate, your heart gets ready to activate, and you get ready to respond. So freezing is not only negative. And when the organism freezes, that is because it's needing to adapt to what's happening. So I want to just say to you, if you've been in something where you froze, that was your body actually doing its best to survive. Sometimes freezing stops us from getting more injury or getting more hurt because we're not moving around. So I work a lot with people who've been hurt in very bad situations. And I often teach my wonderful clients that freezing was also your body doing its best. It was your body trying to do its best. So I want to remind you that body is always wanting to help us. So some of you mentioned, though, that you would fight or you would run. Chances are you're not actually going to choose, okay? It's going to just happen that you do what you do to survive. Now, I know that we are talking across a lot of different contexts here. Some of you are reporting in war zones, some of you are not. So I know I'm being broad as I speak here, but just in general, I want you to understand that the red arrow going up means your body is going into activation to try to help you. And so after trauma, if you feel those feelings, it is your body going back to that state. And I'm going to tell you some ideas about what to do about it in a minute. Let me just do another minute on the snake example, because it's really important to remember the only reaction is not just heart beating, sweating, breathing very rapidly. That's one. That gray arrow you see on your screen is so important to understand. The gray arrow is as powerful of a body response as the red one, except it's doing what? It's shutting you down. It's making you need to lie down. You might not be able to focus. You might get very, very fatigued. This is your body sometimes after a trauma or during a very, very, very bad trauma. Sometimes our body shuts down. So in the picture here, just for one more minute, look at our man. He's run in the house, let's say. He hit the snake. He ran inside. He closed the door. What happens to him then? He's going to get very tired. He might have to hold on to something. He might fall on the ground. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that just happened to me. So now he has to recover, right? His gray arrow, the gray arrow part of his nervous system is going to take over. And he's going to possibly maybe start crying, something now because the trauma is over and his body is now going to react. This is important because after trauma, if you look on the screen, sometimes people collapse or they start talking very fast, telling what happened, or they might start crying. This is called the parasympathetic nervous system, and it's very strong also for people. After trauma, sometimes people need to use the bathroom very, very fast. They need to urinate or potentially defecate because the nervous system is now releasing a lot of what was happening during the red arrow part of the trauma. So why am I telling you this? Because if you've been in a situation that was frightening, afterwards you might have had a kind of collapse where your body went down. That is normal. Look on the right side of the screen for a minute. You see in red again what the body does during fight or flight. So I want you to be aware of these. Why? Because I guarantee you are seeing people who are in these conditions if you are reporting from war zones, and you are also yourself possibly feeling this or absorbing it. So I just want to spend a minute and let you look at that. And then I want to talk about one more response to trauma. And then I want to give you all some tools. I hope you're with me. I'm so appreciative of this audience. Thank you for being here. I'm seeing a little bit of questions real quick. Yeah. Thinking about further. I'm sorry, I'm only reading the English ones, but yeah. So let's think a little bit now about one more condition. I'm just looking at Mohammed's question about reward than a collapse. Yeah, I think what Mohammed is saying is that the reward is that after the trauma, the body releases that activation. So I think that's what Mohammed's saying there. Okay, let's spend another minute on another kind of trauma, which is trauma that is not one snake, right? Trauma that is chronic, living in a war zone, being under violence that is going on and on and on, seeing bodies, things like this. This is now a different kind of trauma. And sometimes it results in what we call dissociation. Dissociation, the saying we sometimes use in English, I don't know if this will translate, Haifa and Mary, but sometimes we say the brain's escape when there is no escape. And so the idea is that your brain, because what you are going through is too much, it's too painful, it's too upsetting, your brain kind of disconnects. And it doesn't mean you suddenly are like a robot, but it means that your body starts to disconnect some of your feelings and you start to not perceive the environment the same way. I'm going to say that again. When you dissociate, you disconnect and you do not perceive the environment in the same way. You have less perception. You have less feelings. It can almost feel numb. It's not the same as fainting, okay? But it is a way of disconnection. Again, for my journalists on this call who are reporting from war zones, you are seeing, I'm sure, people who are dissociating, because people who are under siege and who have had shocking things happen sometimes dissociate. It can be very difficult to see it because they look very disconnected, maybe even like flat in English is the word I would use. And it is very difficult. Try to remember, this is also a way that the body is trying to adapt to the trauma. I'll say that again. This is a way that their body and brain are trying to adapt to the trauma. If you are feeling this as a journalist, it means maybe you are overloaded. Maybe you've seen so much that you're shutting down also. So what I want to say to you is, yes, that can be a way that you protect yourself. So it's not only a bad thing, right? Dissociation can be a way we protect ourselves, but also it can be a difficult way to be living in a normal life. Because some people say, you know, doctor, when I dissociated, it helped me during the bad times, but now I have trouble feeling positive things. I have trouble feeling happy. I have trouble playing with my child because I feel disconnected. This is a sign that maybe it is too much. You know, maybe there was too much on you and you do need some support. You need to find ways to reconnect with yourself. So I want to remind you.
دكتور
Yes, please, Farah.
يعني فقط يعني أود أن أقول هناك أيضا من جديد يعني أيضا العديد من الأسئلة، يعني إذا كنت تحبي أن أقرأ لك تعليق على الأقل، يعني
I know.
أنا لا
Go
أعلم
ahead.
كم الوقت، لكن أيضا هنا دكتور نادين تقول في البلدان التي كما تقولين، يعني تؤكد أن في البلدان التي تعاني من حروب مستمرة يصبح التعايش مع الصدمات أمر واقعي وطبيعي. ولكن أيضا هناك سؤال، يعني إذا كان الكل يشعر بالصدمة، يعني كان هذا الشعور جمعي، ألا يخفف من هول الصدمة؟ يعني الكل يشعر، الكل يمر بنفس المآسي والتحديات، فألا يخفف هذا من الصدمة؟
Mm. That's a very interesting question. And I think Muhammad answered and said, no, it's worse when we've all felt it, right? When we, and I don't mean me, I mean a community. I want to say one thing about that. Trauma affects the individual. It does, right? We are humans. Remember, we are mammals. We are walking around with our bodies and our nervous system. We're individuals. So trauma affects us. However, we also know that trauma ruptures or breaks the fabric in communities. It does. When communities live under violence or oppression, it breaks and fractures some of their connections. Does this mean that communities do not join together and find ways to heal or find ways to recover? No, of course they do. Communities do come together and say, we went through this together, now we will try to recover, we will try to heal. So I want to just say, yes, trauma affects communities. But I don't only say that to mean that communities are only broken by trauma. They're not. They're also drawn together. And we see that around the world in many places. So I want to Farah, may I keep going a little bit and then, or do you want to bring up other questions? I know we have more gathering questions. I'll keep going because I'm not going to be able to answer all these very intelligent, deep questions. And I see that some of you are asking, you have wonderful questions here. So I'm just going to quickly say a couple things. Trauma lands in our brain, don't forget, right? And the reason I have a picture on the screen right now of a brain is because when the red arrow is in charge, right? The heart racing, sweating, breathing differently, then when we remember those events that happened, when we remember events in which the red arrow was activating, then that memory now has the red arrow. Okay, let me say that again. When you remember things that happened when you were in red arrow activation, then the memory can bring the red arrow again. So let me give a quick example. The man with the snake, right? The next day, when his wife says, what happened? What happened with the snake? He starts talking about it and he starts sweating. He starts shaking. His stomach gets upset. Why? Because his memory of being chased is now linked to what his body did during it. So when you are shut down during a trauma or when you are activated during a trauma, the memory of that trauma can bring back those reactions. This is why some of you are saying, why is this happening to me? I feel tired. I feel depleted. I feel, I don't have strength. These are normal reactions. And yeah, this is great. You all are giving so many wonderful comments. I'm going to keep moving a minute because I want to give a few tools and also have more time for questions. Okay, so we know that the body gives us a response, and we know that later that response can cause trouble. So if you would look on the screen here, you're going to see biological signs that sometimes trauma is still with us. You're going to see psychological signs, and you're going to see social signs. And I'm just going to give you a minute. So many of you have talked about these kind of symptoms. So I just want to give you a minute to look at them. Now, remember, even though some of these are normal responses, they are very uncomfortable. And it doesn't mean you have to live with them forever. You have to find ways to address the parts of your bio, your psycho, and your social self that are being hurt. You do need to find ways. Okay, so how do we do this? First of all, remember, you are resilient. There are 130 people on this call. That tells me that your resilience is part of what you draw on, what you pull from within, right? Someone says, we're going to do a webinar about stress, and look at you all show up, right? That's part of resilience. Your comments are resilient, right? You're asking questions, you're engaging. So don't forget that those minds that you have as journalists are part of what is helping you. You are very good critical thinkers. Journalists are resilient. Secondary traumatic stress is real. We've already talked about that. It is hazardous, right? And we know that seeing events can lead to problems, right? We know secondary traumatic stress can lead to red arrow problems and gray arrow problems, right? And if you look at these, nightmares, trouble with our moods. Someone wrote this in the chat, right? Feeling irritable, feeling angry. Having images come to us at night or come to us when we don't want them. That's very hard for people, especially covering war. Feeling tired, numb, trouble concentrating, isolation. What does this all sound like? Biopsychosocial, right? These are signs. Does it mean, oh, we all have a mental illness? Of course not. Of course not. The point of this conversation today is not that we are trying to have you worry that you have a mental illness. The point is that you be able to say, what has been the effect on me and what can I do to address it? Okay. So I hope that is what I'm getting you thinking about, which is where has this very hard work of telling the stories from around the world, where has it caused an imprint in me and what can I do about it? I want to just say that in English, there's another word sometimes we use, which is burnout. And, burnout is kind of different. And I'm only saying it for a minute here because burnout is really not as about trauma. Burnout is like you're tired of your job. You're just sick of the work. You don't feel that good about what you're doing anymore. Maybe you're a little bored. And burnout can also make us feel very negative about work, but it is different than trauma, okay? So I do want to invite you, as you're thinking about yourself, to say, well, wait a minute, what is causing me trouble? Am I tired of my job? And by the way, burnout can be addressed. It involves sometimes getting some support from someone, doing a new kind of story you haven't done, finding a new colleague to talk with. It's a different problem, but I'm putting it here because a lot of journalists say, well, I think I'm burnt out. So I'm inviting you to think about burnout just for a minute there. Okay, let's talk tools because we've been talking about so much, and I want to think about a couple tools, and I'm going to give you a few very simple tools. I'm sorry I cannot solve this. As we know, the world has so much pain, but I will share with you a few psychological tools that I have found useful for people who are dealing with trauma in their work. First of all, I want you to think about what it means to be coping. Okay. And I'm sorry, I don't know the Arabic word for coping. If someone wants to put it in the chat for me phonetically, I would love that. Coping is a word for dealing, right? Managing. I'm doing okay. And when you think about your own coping right now, just pause. And I want you to think about, how am I coping? How are you doing? How are you coping in general? Just think about it. And I think I've got some sound there. Okay. And then what I want you to do is think about, well, what is coping? Because I'm going to read you these 4 points, 5 points, and then I want you to think, how am I doing? Okay. First of all, when we study coping, the first thing in coping is just getting done what needs to be done. How are you doing with that? You don't have to answer this in the chat. Just think it yourself. How are you doing with getting done what needs to be done in your life? How would you say you're doing? How are you doing with the second point? Not having your emotions overpower you. That is coping. Coping does not mean, oh, I have no emotions. No, coping means that you are managing your emotions so up to the degree that they're not taking over you. Okay. That doesn't mean not feeling sad, but it means that you're not lying on the floor crying all day, right? That means the sadness is too much. The third point, taking care of our body. That is a way of coping, just basic care for your body. Fourth point, having a realistic sense of myself. Am I nice to myself and having a realistic sense like, Kate, you're doing okay. You're trying to do your work. And then finally, am I connected and feeling connection to other people? Do I have ways I'm getting connected with people? These are the basic principles of coping. And now what I want you to do is just look at those a minute and think about how you're doing. How would you assess yourself? I'm just going to give you a second to reflect. I predict that some of you, as you look at this list, realize, you know what? I'm actually coping pretty well. I am handling a lot. I am handling a lot. And I would say those of you who recognize that, that's important to say to yourself, you know what? I'm actually working pretty darn hard and I'm really coping okay. So remember that coping is something you can check on in yourself. The other thing to remember, and this is something we hear again and again around the world from journalists, is that social support is a huge way that journalists are resilient. In other words, who do you talk to? Who do you turn to? Where do you go when you're struggling with the work? Journalists who are isolated tell us that, and they say, I don't feel as good about the work. I don't have anyone to talk to. So I want to invite you to think right now, who are my supports? Journalists also tell us rest is so important. You cannot, and I know there are folks on this call who are in right now conditions of violence and conflict, and it is very hard to rest. And I want to say my heart goes to you, and I hope you can find little moments of rest. The human organism has to rest. We have to. taking breaks. Again, I know that is not possible for everybody, but what we know is that finding somewhere to get support and get a little bit of rest is so critical to recovery from trauma. I want to also invite you now to try a couple tools that I really like for learning to notice. I love that word, intibah, I believe in Arabic, intibah. Notice your reactions and notice how you're doing. So in English, I like to say, first we attend, we pay attention to ourselves, then we tend to ourselves. Attend ourselves, tend. Attend, tend. All that means is in a moment, I might say, gosh, I'm hungry and I haven't given myself any food. I'm going to now pause and eat something little. Or I have a headache. I'm going to sit and drink a big glass of water until I can, get a little bit, feel a little better. These are little things we do to make sure your body knows you're paying attention. So right now, let's practice again. Now that you've heard all about coping, you've heard all about the body, let's do our stress check again. How is your stress right now, having thought for the last hour about these things? Did this raise stress for you? That's okay, it might have. Or did it lower stress for you? And you can put it in the chat if you want, you don't have to, but the point is, okay, so we're looking at our numbers here. Noticing that your body might have a little more stress after thinking about this, or maybe a little less because you're like, you know what, actually, I'm coping pretty well. So all I'm telling you is you're learning to notice, right? You're learning to pay attention to yourself, even in this very hard time. Now, I want to teach you a little structure that I really like, and I want to invite you to use this, which is called, in English, the window of tolerance. This is a great kind of map for noticing your reactions. So in the green zone, everybody notice the green zone, please. The green zone is when you are doing your best. You're working, you're thinking, you can pay attention, you're not overwhelmed. In the green zone, we're great, right? Now, you all are high-level journalists. You're in the green zone a lot of the time, I promise you. You're working, you're taking photos, you're writing, you're sending information, interviewing a source. That is your green zone. Now, however, you cannot stay in the green zone all the time. Why? Because your body has to shift. So sometimes your body goes into the red zone, which is what? That red arrow, and you feel edgy, irritable, tired. Sorry, not tired, edgy, irritable, in pain. When you're in the red zone, you need to find a way to pause, step away, do some breathing, drink some water, or maybe even rest. It will help calm your nervous system. Some people use meditation. Many people use prayer. Prayer can be extremely helpful for people when they are agitated. Sometimes you're in the green zone and you start to notice you're getting tired, fatigued. You can't pay attention anymore. You might feel kind of down. Now you're more in the gray zone. What do? Instead of just drinking the 5th cup of coffee, what if you pause? What if you lie down on a chair or sit in a chair for 15 minutes? What if you, again, go for a walk, do something physical, pray? Any of these things can work. The answer is not one solution. The answer is that we have to notice. If you don't notice, you're never going to address these areas. Okay, so we've got red zone, we've got gray zone, right? I'm inviting you to try to learn. I have a little Post-it note on my computer for myself, oops, and it goes like this, and it has a red arrow and a gray arrow. And when I'm working, if I start to feel agitated, I put my finger on the red arrow and I say, Kate, you're in red. You have to take a pause. Sometimes I take a 1-minute pause, right? It doesn't mean I'm going to stop working, but I've found that it helps me very much. Okay, I want to actually teach you grounding and breathing as our last tools, but I want to give a few minutes first for questions. But I'm just going to show you on our screen that you're going to be thinking about your body as we finish our webinar today, noticing what it is telling you. Is my body amping up? Is my body shutting down, right? That's what the window of tolerance tells you. And you're going to use some skills. We're going to learn at the very end today how to do a breathing technique, which is going to be a count of 4, 4, 4. Inhale, hold, exhale. I'm going to teach that at the end. And we're going to learn a grounding technique, which is a way to get yourself centered in the moment. I'm sharing the screen only to show you that these are in the slides, which I believe Arij will provide you. Okay, so I've said a lot, and I'm so appreciative of my interpreters right now because I know I've been talking a lot. Farah, maybe we could spend about 12 minutes on questions right now, and then we'll also do our final tools because I know so many comments have been coming. Farah, do you want to lead us in that?
بداية كان البعض يستفسر إن كان هناك مراجع أو كتب أو كورسات يستطيع الشخص الالتحاق بها يعني التعلم كيف يتجاوز الصدمة بنفسه. يعني هي كانت واحدة
Yes,
من
I'm going to show you. Hold on one sec. Keep talking. I'm going to put up on the screen 3 amazing books. Okay.
تمام. برضو كان واحد من الأسئلة إنه هل من الممكن أن يكون هناك إيجابيات للتعرض للصدمة أو استغلال التعرض للصدمات بشكل إيجابي؟ هي كمان واحد. وهناك نعم.
I'm so happy that question came. I'm going to take these books off the screen. If you've needed them, take a quick picture or you'll get the slides. These are 3 amazing books, by the way. Yes, that question is critical. There is a saying of a term we use called post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth has been shown to be a very powerful experience for people who do work like you all do, like I do, like those who work in trauma-facing fields. And what it's shown, and I'll just be quick, is that working in adversity doesn't only make people feel sad or bad, it also makes people change who they are and say, I'm so happy I was able to be part of this community and tell their story, or that I learned about women who were experiencing this in this place that I went and did a story about. So in other words, post-traumatic growth is a way people say, I've changed and I'm glad for the way I've changed from this work I did. And it is a very real phenomena, and we see it across fields. And journalists definitely talk about post-traumatic growth. I know many of you have had stories that have changed you, right? That's a beautiful thing. They don't only change us for the worse. I've had some very hard work I've done, and it has hurt at times to do that work, but it has also in times changed me in ways that I'm proud of. And I know that you all must have that. Farah, go ahead. I know there's other questions and thoughts.
كمان يعني السؤال هو نفسي أكثر إنه هل الشخص اللي بيمارس الانتهاك أو الضرر برضه بصير عنده تروما مثل الضحية، خلينا نحكي؟ أعيد السؤال.
It's actually a really good question. It's a long answer. I'm going to do a short answer. Perpetration of violence and harm, yes, does change people. It affects them. And it can affect them in their body, as we said, right? Activation, red arrow, gray arrow, and it can affect their meaning making. So yes, perpetration causing harm to others absolutely affects the human organism. I'm looking at some other things about on the comments while you go ahead, Farah. They're just wonderful comments here. Ghassan says that diversifying the work has been helpful, right? Not only doing one kind. I also just one more thing, and then Farah, you go ahead. But someone talking about ongoing trauma. Go ahead.
مثلا في غسان بيحكي انه وهنا انا حربط الاشياء مع بعض، انه بيحكي انه في امور بتساعد الشخص على التخطي من الصدمات، انه ياخذ استراحه. برضه من الاشياء اللي انت ذكرتيها انه ياخذ استراحه من الشيء اللي عم بيكون فيه، او يغير، احيانا بيغير المكان اللي عم بيشتغل فيه. لكن ماذا عن يعني الصحفيين اللي هم مجبرين يكونوا عم بيغطوا من مكان معين وما في مفر؟ يعني مثلا إذا أخذنا على سبيل المثال الصحفيين في غزة فعليا ما لهم هاي الخيارات إنه يروح على مكان آخر
Yes,
أو يغير،
that's right.
فكيف بيقدر يتعامل مع الصدمة؟
I want to say, for those of you reporting from Gaza or any other communities that are in serious violence now, as we know there are others, I know there are folks on the call from Yemen, I believe. So I know there are places where folks are reporting from. First of all, if you are reporting in these conditions, that is right. It's not post-trauma. You are living in a traumatic environment, and that is very overwhelming to the human. I want to say that what we know is when humans are in a crisis situation, okay, a war zone or something like that, or even a natural disaster, they need to get very focused on basic skills and basic coping. Eating, drinking water, trying to rest, and of course, making sure you are somewhere as safe as possible. Those are the basics. That is not the same as I think I'll think about what I'm experiencing and I'll make meaning and I'm wondering how has this work affected me? No. When you are in a crisis, you're not in that mode. So I want to say to you on the call, those of you in those conditions, you are really in conditions in which coping is the most important thing, staying safe and keeping your body at its most basic if you can, keeping your body's needs, most basic needs being met, food, shelter, rest. That is not an okay way to live in an ongoing way. We know that. It is exhausting. So I thank you for the nice comment, Mohammed. So you all, I want to invite everyone on the call to try to imagine ways that you will be through this, that the people who are suffering in the world in war zones will be through this and will be on the other side of it, where they can rest and make meaning and take care and have their human life be safe. But I just want to be honest, when you're in that condition right now, I know that's not what you're doing. When you're in the condition of war, you are coping at your most basic and you are trying to keep yourself and your body safe. So I say that with great respect because I don't want to act like, oh, hey, go meditate, right? When you're sitting in a condition where there might be shelling happening. I know that's not possible. So please, please know that those of you on the call, we see you and we hear you. And our human connection and our human empathy is also going in your direction. I just, I want to say that. Other thoughts?
لا بس كنت بدي أعلق بس على جملة ذكرتيها لي، موضوع المديتيشن أو التأمل. يعني حتى يمكن لو الشخص يعني لأنه برضه ذكروها هون إنه هاي فيث أو الإيمان، يعني حتى لو الشخص ما عمل مديتيشن فيمكن في أشياء تانية، أشياء كثير صغيرة هو بيعملها الفرد أثناء ما هو عم بمر الصدمة، صلاة، دعاء، تنفس مثل ما حكيتي، كل هاي الأشياء يمكن تساعد في التخفيف. وإحنا بنحكي يعني مع صحفيين من غزة، وهم نفسهم بيكونوا هم نفسهم الحدث، يعني مش بس هو عم بتعامل مع ضحايا، لا هو اساسا بيكونوا نفس الشيء اللي عم بيمروا فيه الناس اللي عم بيصورهم بيحكي معهم،
That's right.
هو بيكون اهله بيمروا بنفس الشيء، لكن مع هيك بيحاول انه يكون صامت. هسه ما بعد ذلك هذا الشيء اللي صعب اعرفه. بس سؤالي، اذا كان انت كنت بتحكي لنا انه لازم يكون الشخص عنده اشخاص يلجأ لهم او جهات داعمه او اذا المؤسسه الصحفيه اللي الشخص بيشتغل فيها ما كانت بتوفر هذا الدعم النفسي، او هدول الصحفيين هم بيشتغلوا فريلانس او يعني مش ضمن مؤسسة، فهل في مؤسسات بتقدم لهم هاي الخدمات الدعم النفسي، مثل مثلا دارت سنتر؟ هل في اشياء معينة بتقدموها للصحفيين المستقلين؟
Yes, so a couple things. And I want to invite Arij, if Arij folks on the call do know of resources, please put those in the chat. Dart Center, our website, dartcenter.org, we do have written resources. It's not, this is not the equivalent of therapy, right? But we have written resources that we invite you, please feel free to look at. I don't know a lot about what is available online, so I want to be careful because I don't want to act like I know there's resources. So please, Arij, if you have things or if others on the call have suggestions, I want to invite that. Yes, the slides will be sent, by the way. Regarding the fact that, sorry, Farah, I'm trying to remember the first part of the question though, because you were speaking about something else at first. Oh, meditation, right? Meditation? Yeah. Yes.
كان هو مجرد تعليق انه في اشياء صغيره الشخص بيعملها، يعني حتى لو مش تامل، يمكن صلاه، يمكن دعاء.
Yes, yes. And okay, gotcha. I'm so glad you said that. Sorry. Meditation is something that you can use in moments of stress, even if it is, actually a very hard thing, right? Meditation, and the thing I'm going to teach you in a minute called grounding, you can also use in moments of high stress. I just don't want to pretend that I can give a tool for handling being in war, right? There is no tool that's going to stop the stress of that. But there are tools for afterwards, or when you can take a moment to orient your body, to calm your body, that can be helpful. Someone asked earlier, are humans resilient to trauma? And I just want to say, yes, we know again and again that the human organism is very strong and humans can recover and heal from trauma. That does not mean it erases the trauma. It does not erase the trauma. But humans require a few things I want to say before I teach you grounding. I just want to remind you, support. We need other people, bio, psycho, social, right? And we need ways to make meaning that are helpful to us and that are positive or at least healing. Because someone put a comment that, why is it that humans after trauma make meaning in ways that they attack themselves? And it is true. I've been working for 25 years with survivors, and it's amazing to me how when we get hurt, we humans, we tend to tell ourselves very negative things about ourselves. It was my fault. I'm no good. I'm ashamed, right? And that, you're right, that the person who put that in the chat, that is a very painful part of being a human. But I will tell you, humans can fight that urge by sharing, by talking, by having a community where they find ways to listen to each other. And you journalists are that community. Look at this hour and a half and the comments that you've done in this chat. You are a very active community and you want to support each other. So we want to remind you that you are your best support. Also, again, just prayer and spirituality, I just want to say one more time, can be very helpful for people. I've seen that again and again, that faith and practice of a religion or any kind of other practice of spirituality can be very helpful to humans. I'm going to bring us now into two tools because they're very, very easy. They're not, you have to practice them, but you can do them anywhere. You can do them in an airplane, in an office, sitting on your bed, in a hotel, sitting outside. You can do these tools. One is breathing and one is grounding. And again, our field of psychology, we've studied that when you teach yourself to slow your breathing, it actually can slow your heart rate and calm you down. But this is important, you have to practice. It doesn't just work like that. So I'm inviting you to learn this breathing from me right now, and then learn this grounding, and then practice them. They're little tools. They're tiny, right? But I promise you, I teach them to people in prison. I teach them to people who've been tortured. They are very, very practical. So I want you to listen now. If you've been with me the whole time, first of all, I'm so grateful. I want you to take your hands off your phone or your keyboard and sit up straight. Take your two hands and put them on the top of your legs. And I want you to sit up and listen to my voice as I help you to just do what we call ground ourselves. All that means is feel the ground underneath you. Why? Because trauma takes us into the past and makes us relive. And trauma also makes us worry about the future, what's going to happen. What grounding is a way to just say, right now, I'm going to just stay in this moment for a few minutes, not even maybe 5 minutes. It's just a minute to take your body and keep it in the moment. And by the way, someone's asking about yoga. Yoga is definitely something that's been studied as very positive for people who've suffered trauma. Okay, listening to my voice, I want you to sit up straight, give your shoulders a roll, and put your 2 feet on the ground and your 2 hands on the top of your legs. I want you to listen to my voice and imagine that you're pushing your feet on the ground as hard as you can. Just push your feet until you feel that earth underneath you. What does it feel like? It is strong, it is hard, and it is holding you right now. Feel that ground underneath you just for a minute and think about the fact that right now the ground is holding you, just here. Take your hands and I want you to feel the texture of your clothing. You're using your hands to just feel what do your clothes feel like on the top of your legs? Are they smooth, bumpy? And as you feel that, you're still pushing your feet on the ground. And I want you to think about your fingertips and how your fingertips are sending a message to your brain that's telling you what that texture feels like. Think about your very strong, very beautiful brain and how your brain is making you do this work as a journalist to tell stories about what's happening in the world. Your brain is strong. Your body is strong. You're pushing your feet on the ground still. You feel the ground. Use your eyes now. Find 3 things in your environment, just quickly, 1, 2, 3, that you hadn't noticed before. I'm doing it. I'm still pushing my feet. I'm feeling the texture of my clothing. And now I see 3 things. What color are they? What shape? Think of how your eyes are seeing so much diversity and they can take it and send it to your brain. Amazing. Use your ears now to hear a sound that's not my voice. Just listen for any sound. Pushing my feet on the ground. This is the world sending vibrations to your eardrum, and your eardrum is sending it to your brain. Your brain is so strong, and you use your brain every day. Pushing my feet on the ground. Feeling in this moment, I'm together with a community of people around the world that I feel very lucky to have been able to talk to. Thank you for being with me. I want you to now listen to my voice, and I'm going to count for a couple times. We're going to breathe in through the nose for 4, hold for 4, push out through the mouth for 4, okay? Just practice with me a couple times. Listen carefully. You're going to breathe in, ready, in through the nose. 1, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out through the mouth. 2, 3, 4. Again, in through the nose. Hold, out through the mouth. In through the nose. Hold, out through the mouth. Let's do one more. In through the nose. Hold, out through the mouth. I want you to push your feet on the ground again. Breathing and grounding are little tools. They're very small. They're designed to remind you, though, that your body needs you to pay attention to it. Your body, bio, your mind, psycho, and yourself in relation to other people, social. They will show you the way to go. They'll show you where they're hurting. And I want to invite you as journalists to recognize that your work is so valuable. And it's essential that you take care of yourselves and listen to each other as needed. This is an incredible community. I've never had a chat like this where such incredible sharing and great ideas. I'm going to let Farah end here. I don't know if you want to end with any comments or resources. I've just so enjoyed being with you all, and I hope you'll think about your own response as you continue to do such beautiful work.
دكتور كيت، يعني كل التعليقات يعني يقدمون لك الشكر على الجلسة الغنية، وأكيد كنا بنتمنى أن تكون الجلسة أطول. ويمكن كلياتنا بحاجة هيك لهذا الدعم النفسي، اللي حد يذكرنا إنه الإشي اللي بنقوم فيه لو شو ما كان هو أي قصة، أنت بالنهاية بتوصل صوت الناس، فأي قصة بتقوم فيها هي مهمة. يعني لا تنسوا أهمية الدور اللي بتقوموا فيه. وبس بدي أذكرهم كمان بتعبئة الاستبيان اللي يمكن ينحط على الشات، يعني بس عشان نعرف يقيموا الجلسة ونستطيع تحسين عملنا أكثر وأكثر مستقبلا. دكتور كيت، شكرا جزيلا لوقتك، يعني ونتمنى كمان يكون في لنا جلسات أخرى بوجودك. برجع بذكر كان في كثير أسئلة، ولسه في كثير أسئلة على الكيو اند اي، بس من الصعب طرحها جميعا. فبس يعطيكم العافية جميعا.
Thank you. Keep the conversation going in your community. And the questions you've asked that I didn't get to, some of them they're all very important. Keep the dialogue open. Trauma is not a one-time conversation. It's about human hurt. It's about human suffering. And we have to be vigilant to talk about it in order to find ways to recover and to heal and to take care of each other. So keep this conversation going, please. And thanks for inviting Dart.
شكرا لكل اللي انضم معنا من كل الوطن
شكرا
العربي،
شكرا
العراق، فلسطين، سوريا، الأردن،
شكرا.
ونحن سعيدين، كلنا سعيدين.